for more minutes than usual, right? But he's enjoying, telemedicine and telehealth services. Areas for innovation here, actually, if you look at it, no, because right now most doctors are just in Zoom or Google Meet. So we are seeing actually a new opportunity for businesses coming up, whether it is for scheduling and appointments, no, deployment of modules, prescriptions, follow-ups, and even billing and payments. Because right now we just have to deposit, no, to their e-wallets or bank to bank. The third is e-finances. So we're saying already that's goodbye to queuing. Those who deferred shifting to online payments or getting a mobile wallet are now being pushed to do so as they try to avoid making physical payments. So there's also a surge in online payment searches. And we've seen that online banking and digital wallets are now here to stay. Some of you who actually do not want to attempt to create their own e-wallet, download their e-wallet account, or even do bank transfers are now forced to do that during this 6 month period where it's just pandemic and that's the only way you can do business. So we've seen a tremendous rise in all of these online platforms and online apps. No? And here we're seeing already that there's a digitally enabled personal finance. People are quarantine is a chance to finally move to online banking, online bills payments. But at the same time, on the other side, we're seeing a lot of customers also complaining that the financial most of the financial institutions are not really prepared for it. No, when they see when they experience a surge of traffic. So having said that, I hope I have enough to make a case that all roads lead to digital, and digitization is now transforming the world. However, how much of our time in the boardroom and in the management meetings do we talk about digital governance? Digital governance is actually the framework for establishing accountability, roles, and decision-making authority for an organization's digital presence. In a nutshell, there are three key governance areas when we talk about digital. The first is digital strategy. Who determines the direction for digital? I'm surprised that if I asked some of my colleagues, they would say, oh, we look for a young person in the organization because he is the most digital savvy. I would always counter digital strategy is always created and pushed by the board of directors, right? And of course, working together with management. The second is digital policy. Who specifies what your organization must and must not do online? This is the role of management. You have to set up the policies that in this entire digital space, and I'll go through each of them very quickly. No, and finally, digital standards. Who decides the nature of your digital portfolio? If you're going online, if you're going to do digital business, what are the standards that you need to set up? So just very quickly, okay? So digital strategy is all about an organization's approach to leveraging the capabilities of digital. Here, there are two facets of digital strategy. The first is the guiding principles, which will provide stakeholders with a streamlined, quantitative expression of an organization's high-level digital business intent and values. And the second would be the performance objectives. It would define quantitatively what digital success means for an organization. In ICD, we created a digital balance scorecard where we guide organizations from step 1 to step 4 of digital transformation. We look at the organization, how we talk to customers, how we maneuver the entire operations to have a digital lens, and finally, on the finance side, how do we grow our revenue from a small percentage of revenue coming from digital to become a core business of our operations. So this is something that I would suggest the board of directors and management take a hard look. What is your guiding principle and what are the performance objectives that would enable your digital strategy? The second would be digital policy. These are guidance statements that allow organizations to manage risk and ensure that its core interests are served as it operates online. So when you go online, you do not just create a website or an app and say, okay, it's there, please come, right? And buy our stuff online. What is more important is that you have to create digital policies, and you can and actually it includes employee policies on social media, IT, and marketing policies on handling customer data. These policies would include, among others, accessibility, branding, domain name, how language and localization, security, privacy, intellectual property, social media, among many others. You'd be surprised, for example, If you create a policy about the use of social media, for example, my favorite example was in my previous life when I was doing policies for organizations. What will you do if your employee posted on their social media something about praising or using or patronizing a competitor? So it's on Facebook and they're saying, I'm using this competitor's brand. Would you have the right to penalize that employee? If it is not in a policy, then it's going to be very hard for you to create those sanctions, if ever you will create sanctions for them. The third would be digital standards. Digital standards lay out the nature of an organization's digital portfolio. It requires collaboration among resources and talents with a broad range of competencies to have standards working together. Digital standards can be your design standards, editorial and publishing standards when you go online or use an app. What are your network and infrastructure standards? Should you go to the cloud or should everything be in-house? Should it be private? What are customer fulfillment and payment standards? What payment gateways will you allow? How will you fulfill your customers? Will you use it yourself or will you partner with third-party logistics providers? Customer management, support, and delivery standards. Will you respond if they interacted with you online? Should you respond in 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or 1 hour? Right? And what are the people and culture standards that you need to set up to support all of your entire digital operations? So as I will not go to this in detail, but digital governance is all about, again, setting up your digital strategy and really writing it down. What are your digital policies and what would be the standards that you will be setting up so that everyone is guided. Digital strategy comes from the board and management. Digital policy is set up by management and brought down to the employees, and digital standards again are executed by the employees. So what is important in successful digital governance? Very important to have a strong push by the leadership. It also requires having the right talent, the right digital talent, and at the same time, you cannot just hope that someone you hire one person to take on everything. You have to appropriate the right resources to support digital governance. Let me end by saying that if we all agree that digital is the end state of organizations, if we all agree on that first phrase, then the proper digital governance framework is the only means for all of us, for all of our organizations, to have a sustainable and successful end, given this new digital world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Donald. I, for one, is actually very much for digital, having relied heavily on GCash, BPI online transfer, even Shopee Pay and Lazada wallet during this COVID pandemic. So I think I have to thank all of the panelists for your very insightful presentations. I have to remind also the participants that if you have any questions in relation to the presentations, please type it in the Q&A box. And then the forum team will address your questions either through chat or the questions will be raised to the panel. Before we proceed to our discussion, let's first have a poll question to see what our participants think should be prioritized during this new normal. So may I ask for the poll question? Okay. So what do you think should be the priority in surviving the new normal? So letter A is employee health, safety, and wellness. B is business continuity and succession planning. C is short-term and long-term expenses. D is supply chain management. And E, business planning and strategy for new opportunities. So for those who are watching through live stream in Facebook, please feel free to answer or to input your answers in the comment section. Okay. So we shall see what answers we will get from our audience. I think we'll be closing the poll soon, so you should all input your answers now. Okay. So our results, it seems that employee health, safety, and wellness is the clear winner with 61% of the votes from our audience. This isn't really a big surprise because if you think about it during this pandemic, I think a lot of focus was really given on employees because they are really an important stakeholder of corporations. So I would like to see if our panelists agree with this result and what, in their opinion, is the most important lessons that companies have learned so far with respect to the pandemic and the new normal. So we can start with Adilani. Again, follow the order of presentation.
So I'm not surprised with that result because, of course, um, for us in Meralco, in the past more than 100 years of operations, the guiding principle has always been malasakit. And malasakit begins at home. Kapag nagpakita ka ng malasakit para sa iyong mga empleyado at sa kanilang mga pamilya, ang mga empleyadong ito ay magpapakita ng malasakit sa kumpanya, sa mga customers nito at para sa lahat ng stakeholders.
Agree. Totally agree with that, Attorney Lani. Next, we can ask Ricky.
Yeah, it's interesting, Carmela, that in the survey that I referred to, we actually asked respondents, and this was, if you recall, we took the survey in April. What was your immediate concern of your boards? And overwhelmingly, it was employee health and safety. So it was in April, right? We also asked them, though, in 6 months' time, what is going to be your concern? And they figured the answer then was business continuity. So with regards to the survey, it was in your survey, it was two answers, no, but separated by time. So in other words, what the boards were telling us then was that they were going to be worried about or concerned about employee health and safety first. But after that, once they had assured themselves that their people were safe, then it turned to the business. And how are we going to get out of this situation?
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. That is actually true. Because, even if you're very concerned now about your employees, if in the long term your business cannot continue, then you really also cannot take care of the welfare of your own employees. So, yes, we proceed with Ms. Booth.
Well, I would agree with the opinion of both speakers or co-panelists, but I would add that while employee safety was the initial concern, as you plan your survival and sustainability, I think it has become more paramount now that health and safety must now be embedded into your long-term strategy. Where before we were probably not as conscious about health and safety, except if you were in a factory or in a situation where employees are more exposed to dangers such as this. Now it has become more apparent that health and safety has now needs to become part of your long-term planning.
Yes, that is also a key factor in sustainability, yeah. Ensuring that these are embedded in the company's long-term strategy. I do agree. And now I go to Dr. Donald.
For me, of course, employees are the most important. Only because you have to put your house in order during this time of chaos, right? You have to, and employee management for me is very important. It's not only about the good things like what can we do to support them. Some we have to retrench. We have so many businesses, right? Wearing my corporate hat and even my entrepreneur hat, where we have to let go of employees. So I own some retail outlets. I have some restaurants. Sometimes we have to decide to close down. But when we close down and we don't have enough cash, you have to find a way to still, even if they're not connected to you, you still have to give them ayuda or whatever, right? Even for the next 3 months or 6 months, right? So I think, and I think that would bode well for you because in the end, they would say, okay, I'm willing after 1 month of what I call denial, COVID denial, and this new reality, they would more, come back and said, let me help you, right? So I think the employees is very important. But I think secondly, the direction for business. What I always say, digital, and I've been an advocate of digital for 20 years. Digital before is a long-term strategy. It has become the short-term strategy of survival. And that's why I think everyone is scrambling to start to understand what's all of this. How do I download this app? How do I go into Zoom and everything else? No? So and those I think are the two key pillars right now for any company to survive, at least to win, for 2020, 2021.
Yes. Just to connect, I think really the point raised by everyone and specifically by Adilani earlier on Malasakit, that's really a key thing that makes us survive during this COVID pandemic. It doesn't only apply, I think, to our employees, but actually to everyone in society. And we've seen it a lot ever since this pandemic has started in March. And I think that has also something to do with our Filipino spirit. So just to continue on with the discussion, Attorney Lani, I would like to ask you the first question. So you mentioned earlier in your presentation that you were able to perform or still continue with your good corporate governance practices in your company even during the lockdown. And coming also from another PLC, and we also tried to exert all efforts possible to ensure that we continue with servicing our customers, our stakeholders, and providing all that we can to everyone. I would just like to see what are the challenges or what was the main challenges that Meralco encountered and how were you able to overcome this?
Of course, after taking care of that, the employees' welfare as well as the safety and health of their families. Of course, the difficult part is that some of the employees had to work from home. Those that are not frontliners. And as corporate governance advocates, so we have different roles. It may be in internal audit, finance, legal. The challenge is really to keep your supply chain clean, in a sense, and to make sure that there is still integrity. So whereas before you would rely on face-to-face encounters and communication, this time a lot of that is done virtually. So that is the reason why our office, together with internal audit, launched an ethical climate survey. So we want to know what the employees are thinking and what they have observed, and to also give them a chance to freely express what observations they have in terms of our operations. So you made sure that, because this was done under strict confidentiality, so we were able to elicit some whistleblowing reports, and we continue to investigate those just to make sure that we still, have a handle on all of these activities and ensure that none of our, we just have the resources now are very limited. We have to make sure that none of this is lost due to fraud.
Yeah, when things are virtual, it always really makes things more difficult. I agree. So for Ricky, I think it is safe to say that the COVID pandemic has really taken a lot of our Philippine corporations unaware and unprepared. So what do you think are the lessons that can be learned from this experience in terms of identification of risks and risk management? And just to add, although you mentioned that size does not matter, should the extent of risk management policies be dependent on a company size?
No, I think again, you sh- there are many people, and you know this, Carmela, from your previous life as a regulator. Many
Yes.
people say, I can't do this, I can't do that because I'm too small or I can't afford it. Well, I think the pandemic showed us that if you don't do it, you're not protected because of your size. COVID knows no restrictions, or does not limit itself to big companies or small companies, no. And so again, I mean, one of the things I would say is that the regulators tell us to do things for a reason, and many companies, I feel, let's read the reports that the regulators want us to make, no. Let's read them and try to see the risk gaps and how we can address them. And again, I mean, you always want to be ready. So this caught us unaware. But what happened in the case of Pearl Harbor, right? So the Americans came back, they won the war. We have to do the same situation. We have to do the same thing in this space, no? In case of COVID. Hopefully there's not going to be another pandemic, although scientists are saying that we're going to live with the pandemic like we live with the flu. There are going to be mutations every year. So we may need to get vaccines. Who knows?
Yeah.
But, we got to be prepared. And we can't use excuses, right? We have to do it. Di ba may kasabihan tayo, kung may gusto, may paraan. Kung may ayaw, may dahilan. It was very interesting in the survey that we prepared. When we asked the people who did not have a risk management strategy in place, are you going to impose one? Over half left the answer blank. I don't know what that means. You tell me. Pero parang mukhang hindi pa na sila nadala eh.
Baka they were thinking, it's really a one-off thing and the chances of it happening is very improbable. So let's not. But still, again, we have to put importance really on proper risk management, proper identification of risk in risk management.
And remember, this is not all about COVID. As we saw, unfortunately, last week, the reason why this seminar was postponed, there are
The
other
typhoon,
risks
yeah.
still going on. So you have
Yes.
cyber risk,
Climate change.
whatever.
Environmental risks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And just to interject, 3.8 million of our customers lost power during the height of Ulysses. So we had to really work very hard to restore power. And now we still have about 78,000 customers who still don't have power. And we have to continue to address all of these issues. Despite the pandemic, our frontliners have to be out there.
yeah, so I think the sentiment, especially after what happened last week, was para na tayong nasagasaan ng COVID, inatrasan pa tayo ng bagyo.
God bless us.
Risk management.
I hope 2020 will be over soon.
Yeah, it's almost over. But risk management will make sure that at least hindi tayo aatrasan.
Yes. I think it was also mentioned by Secretary Carl earlier that it's not risk avoidance anymore, but risk management. So that's one thing for everyone to remember, I think. So I'll just proceed to Ms. Boots. So good corporate governance standards have always put significant focus on gender diversity, inclusion, equality. And with the COVID pandemic and the new normal that we are currently facing, do you think that there are any additional key challenges that women would be facing in business? And if yes, what can be done to address this?
Certainly. Admittedly, because of this work from home setup, all genders are affected, okay? And we have to deal with balancing domestic and professional duties, broadband issues, telco issues. But I think we have to accept, or rather recognize, the fact that women still predominantly take care of household responsibilities, and added to that, schooling responsibilities, because children have to be taught by the parents or supervised by the parents as they attend school virtually. So we still have this burden of unpaid work care. If only males, although some males do, take on some of the household work, I think we will be able to, address this added burden on the women who have to juggle. As I mentioned in my presentation, they're not only working from home, but they're working for the home. So that's a challenge that women have to face, and that companies need to also recognize, that now that women are spending more time at home doing both work and household duties, they have to be a bit more flexible in terms of, let's say, I don't have children to tutor, but I know that I'm sure parents like you here who still have teenage children, at certain times of the day, you have to allot a few hours to supervise your children in their schoolwork. So maybe your employers will have this tendency to not honor, or shall we say, for you to be on call 24/7 and not consider, the normal working hours that we have. So companies themselves have to recognize the need for that understanding or empathy as to the demands on women. I also have to mention increased gender violence, domestic violence at home. This is not talked about because women don't report it, but in fact, we've seen a significant increase in gender-based violence because both couple are now at home. And some companies that I know have created help desks where women can call on a confidential basis and seek for advice as to how they should proceed or how evidently have come significantly as a result of the pandemic. But as I said again, This is exacerbated by the pandemic, but needs to be addressed on a longer term basis.
I do agree with that, Ms. Boots. And actually, just to lighten the note further, I wanted to ask Dr. Donald and Ricky earlier how they would feel about sharing in the household chores. But we might, we have limited time, so I'll just proceed with the next question. So for Dr. Donald, information technology and digital transformation is playing a big role in the transition to the new normal. So in fact, I think personally that if all of this had happened at the time when there was still no internet and we had no IT infrastructures in place, no company would actually survive this COVID pandemic. But with all of this that's happening now, from a corporate governance perspective, what advice would you give to corporations to promote acceptance of digital and to consequently ensure that there is proper IT or digital governance in place?
I think the lack of appreciation of corporate governance in the digital and IT world, no, has stemmed from, for example, the very fundamental reason why business people go to business. And it is just to do business. And then you create rules on governance and risk management, like what Ricky is saying. They're actually very important. But from a businessman's perspective, why would I do that? Why would I spend so much time when I have to talk about my customers? I have to listen to work on sales and marketing, operations, finance, and everything else. And then now you put in another complex word, digital, there, and they wouldn't know what to do. I think if we can be more prescriptive, like if they have a checklist of 1 to 10, it might be easier. But if you look at organizations today, I would always say that organizations, it's totally different. You cannot create a digital transformation checklist because the needs are different. The talents and resources are different. The entire business model, no, is something you have to take into consideration. So I think that's the very first hurdle, and that's why we've always been advocating, especially in ICD, that you have to take on a digital transformation journey. When you transform, sabi ko, if you look at transformers, even if a robot transforms very quickly, it's still step by step if you think about it, right? Which part would
Mhm.
move until all the way you fully transform. So when you talk digital transformation will not happen overnight nor in a span of a year. The fastest I can see and I've experienced in companies is always around 3 4 years because the entire organization has to think digital, has to think that you have to properly do, and digital really is not only just going into a digital business but the governance thereof, right? That you have to now set new rules and standards for that entire, it's like opening a totally new store in outer space, right? Or in the digital space in that matter. No? So again, I think it's the uncertainty and the unknown, and that's why I think people are stopping to venture into that.
Mm. I think I'm sure that our audience have more questions for our panelists. But before we proceed, it's time for another poll question from our audience. Let's keep them active and alert. So, given the recently concluded discussion and also based on your experiences, what is the most crucial logistical challenge posed by the pandemic in complying with corporate governance practices? So again, for those who are watching through the live stream in Facebook, please feel free to write your answers in the comment section. So we'll see the answers in a few minutes. This has actually been a very rich discussion. I think a lot of our participants, we actually have a lot. If I may say it, we have 789 participants in this forum, and that's really a lot. So I'm sure everyone is very much interested and have picked up a lot from our discussion. So we'll be closing the poll question in a few seconds. So for those who haven't inputted their answers, it's time to do it now. And closed. And share the results. So the number one is still the work from home, the skeletal setup, and the second one is key technology and equipment. Yes, this is actually very challenging. Imagine all people had to start working from home. You couldn't go to your office and you had to keep, it's part of the business continuity plan. This should actually be part already of all business continuity plans of corporations moving forward. So I'll be checking the Q&A box for questions. Okay, so let's see. First question is regarding risk management. So it has been discussed that these are black swan or unusual circumstances. Let us say the company is severely affected because of the pandemic or any unusual events. Where will the theoretical blame be made? I am asking this because in labor cases, you have to prove the business losses to justify closures or job cuts, to consider it as an authorized cause to terminate employment. Can the pandemic be made as a valid excuse? So maybe I can ask Ricky to answer.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, what do they say? Failure has 1,000 parents. Um, it's kind of, I think, at this point, you cannot lay the blame on anyone. You know, what's done is done. But having said that, I mean, I just like to say, and Donald said it very movingly. Uh, a lot of businesses are having to make a lot of tough decisions, especially with regards to employees, keeping them on in their welfare, and as Boots also emphasized. And you know, it's a reason. It should be a reason, but not an excuse. I mean, I think it's important to the semantics is important. Um, you know, we're as Secretary Chu has showed, our economy contracted by 16.5% in the second quarter. I think 9% for the semester, but 16.5% by quarter. No, and the natural tendency for everyone, uh, ourselves, companies, is to pull back. We want to be sure that we can sustain ourselves, have liquidity. But just note that the collective action of pulling back is actually going to accelerate and create a negative cycle, no, for contraction. It's going to make things worse. So to the extent that we can, avoid it by keeping people on the payroll, we have to do it. Having said that, of course, we also have a responsibility, which I think is overarching, to keep the company going, no, because there are other people who are dependent on a successful company, no. So I think, but let's be careful, and also remember, we just got news of the vaccines coming out. All right. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel. Having said that, it could be 12 to 18 months away, but the light at the end of the tunnel is there, even if it's a pinprick. And you're going to need people when that turnaround comes. And if the stock market, we're with the PSE right now, the stock market is already above what it was at the COVID level with the pandemic. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. But we're already at the point where it was pre-COVID. They're factoring in that this is going to be a turnaround in the next 12 months. So we got to be ready. So let's be careful. You may let go of people, but then your problem will become, I need to find somebody, right? So the challenge is really, how do you bridge that between the valley now and the peak that's going to come down the road?
That is true for most companies for now. For the second question, for Ms. Garcia, do you have comprehensive data to capture how Philippine companies are truly embracing diversity and inclusion initiatives, especially with regard to gender? Apart from boards, for instance, what percentage of top management or C-suite roles are given to women? I know that companies are being encouraged to put into practice DE&I concepts, but we know it will take years if they are left to their own initiative and goodwill. Are there efforts at all to lobby legislators to enact laws that will promote this initiative in reality? We can take a quantum leap. Thank you for your presentation. This is from Gina de la Vega Cruz.
Quite a number of questions
Yes.
there. But as to research on diversity inclusion, yes, there are a lot actually that has taken place all over the world. And one of the studies that I mentioned on the ILO report included the Philippines as one of the countries covered with about 380 something participants. So there's so much work done on gender diversity already. But the challenge is to make companies implement and embrace gender and diversity. And that is actually the reason why we have organized this coalition for women empowerment among large businesses, precisely for the private sector to take the initiative to do it within their own companies, but beyond that, to influence their customers, to implement their suppliers, and even to influence government regulators to consider, applicable rules and regulations. At the moment, in respect to, we do have this, this ESG goals, and one of them is gender. If I recall, number 5, okay? And for the moment, I believe the SEC is already studying how PLCs, to begin with, will be able to report on all of this, including gender. But to be able to do that, companies must first embrace D&I so that they can provide the regulators with the appropriate data and statistics to support that they are, in fact, practicing D&I in their businesses or in their companies. So the membership of PBCW is our large businesses, name companies like Accenture, SGV, Ayala, PNB. Precisely why? Because we want them to be able to influence even their own peers in the industries that they're involved with. There's also data in ICD. We do keep track as well. I cannot recall the numbers, but we do have not significant, but a reasonable percentage of women in boards. I think about less than 20. And also we have a lot, number of women as CEOs. So there's progress, okay? Progress hasn't been as fast as we would like it to be. But I think what has happened is with this pandemic, you've seen how female leaders, heads of state, have been very successful in leading the COVID response efforts in their particular. So I think there's an increased consciousness on the value and the benefits that D&I can give. And therefore, I can see a more accelerated pace for D&I acceptance in both the corporates. As to regulation, there are already existing, well, for example, the reporting requirements of SEC in the annual corporate governance scorecard. There is a question there on, do you have a diversity and inclusion policy, and how many women do you have in boards? Though no mandatory quotas have been set, I think that's one step forward. And I saw a question about quotas and non-quotas. There's no hard, fast rule whether we should have quotas for women in boards or not quotas, because experience has shown that for some countries which had quotas, they were successful, but other countries were not successful despite the quotas. So I think it's we just have to take it one step at a time. But I do believe that for this to move forward, we have to be disruptors ourselves. And so, we have a lot of advocacy groups trying to do this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boots. For our next question, it's for Dr. Donald. So security issue is still the main concern. Why many enterprises are hesitant to go digital. Another is the lack of regulations, considering that sometimes the other transacting party is not within the jurisdiction of Philippine laws. How do we address these concerns?
I always say that security is always two-pronged. One is technology, the second is human. In many cases, if you look at the cases in cybersecurity, mostly it's really personal error. It's usually one of your employees clicking on a malicious link, allowing that person to give access to your entire IT database. So it's like you have one employee who is not trained who opened the doors, right, for a robber to get in. However, so that's the human part, no? I'm sure some of us would get an email and would say, for example, please click this just to check if this is correct, from a friend, and you don't know if that's validated or not. If you think it's suspicious, you don't have to click on that, because then it would open up your laptop and your IP to scrupulous individuals, no? The second, of course, is the technology side. You have to start investing in cybersecurity software and hardware. So I think there are already standards within the cybersecurity, the cyber industry. So we just have to make sure that those are implemented. With regard to security with other countries, I think almost every country already has like in the UK, there's GDPR, right? So data governance laws and protection already applied across many countries. I think it's not a matter of country, but it's a matter of which organizations you are working with. So if you're working mostly with established companies, I think you can. It's safe to say they're safe. Before in my previous job, I was with Dentsu in the art agency. We were very strict with even data privacy. Every time you collect information from a person, you have to already have a policy, right? Get that info, when you acquire that info, where will you store it? Where will you actually how will you destroy it later on after the objective is done? And if any breaches happen, you can be fined tremendously, not only locally but also abroad, no, being a multinational company. So I think the laws are there. It's a matter of who you want to really engage with.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is again for Ms. Boots. Would you be in favor of a mandated proportion of female representation on boards of PLCs in the Philippines? Why or why not? Thank you.
I think I responded to that question a little bit earlier, but as I mentioned, uh, in some countries, like in Scandinavia, where quotas were first set, it actually succeeded in being able to increase the number of women in boards. But you also have an example like Malaysia, which imposed a 30% quota, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, but seemed not to have yet reached that level despite the mandatory requirement. So I cannot categorically say yes or no, because it will also have to be depending on the local situation. So initially, I would think maybe not until we have more companies glued, or rather, shall we say, imbibe this culture. And eventually, I think it might help to have some quotas to accelerate the process.
Just to give my opinion on that point, I think it would just be good if you just set a target. It doesn't really have to be a mandatory quota, but at least you have something to aim for, an objective. And if in case you don't get to meet the objective, then at least you'd be able to discuss among yourselves if what could be the reason for not reaching that objective, or what if indeed you can scrap the objective or the target quota. But
Well,
just
some,
make it mandatory might be a bit difficult, I would agree.
yeah,
Yes.
just to add to that, well, most companies that I've seen or where I see it, we definitely have a stated diversity and inclusion policy. And in fact, in addition to that, we also state that we encourage, or rather, we target towards diversity in the boards, including gender, or because
Yes.
gender is just one aspect or dimension of DNI. But I do agree with you that it may not be mandatory, but as a good practice, companies may want to set targets. I just want to share an anecdote about ICD, where Ricky, Donald, and I are all members. In our
Nice.
election this year,
Lani, also.
and also
I am actually a member already.
all of us are members.
Right.
Also of ICD.
I think we are an example of an organization, not a business organization, which walks the talk, because we have a 50-50 gender representation in our board. And we're probably the only organization, business organization, even company, that has achieved that. So we are promoting DNI as an organization, as part of governance, and we are practicing it as well.
Okay. Also, another question for Ricky and it's Chair Aquino, but I think Chair Aquino might not be here to answer. So the quite high number of PLCs in the survey without risk management system present a need opportunity for the SEC to step up its efforts to get PLCs to comply rather than just explain with the code of corporate governance for PLCs. Yeah, so it's not really a question. I think it's a comment. I'll just read it. SEC should scrutinize the PLC's annual corporate governance report to ensure a higher level of compliance with the recommendations standards in the code, particularly those related to risk management, especially at the board and board committee level. So I think SEC will take note of this. So next question, again, it's a question for everyone in the panel. So from a corporate governance standpoint, what needs to be done differently or what must be focused on more particularly at this time? So maybe I can ask Attorney Lani to answer.
Um, I would also like to give a shout out to Dr. Lim, no, because data governance is really very, very important. In our company, we have been on a digital transformation journey for a couple of years. But just to give you an idea of the impact of this pandemic, just in February of this year, we only had 392,000 customers who were enrolled in our Meralco app or Meralco Online. But end October, that number jumped to more than 2 million customers. So we still have to evaluate the effects of that, but generally, Meralco app, Meralco Online enabled us to serve the needs of our customers despite the lockdowns and the quarantine. So it's really important to visit and revisit your data governance strategies.
Okay, may I ask also if there anyone else from the panel who would like to?
I can venture a response. I think this whole pandemic has brought about a new culture change because of all this virtual activities that has taken place. I'm sure all of us here are complaining about Zoom fatigue, meeting fatigue, and all that. But then again, it is the new way of doing things. So we just have to learn to adapt to it and adjust to the demands of this kind of corporate culture, which before was probably non-existent because we would all take the time to meet physically customers, clients, employees, etc., etc. But then again, this has totally thrown out of the window. And maybe I'm sure 90% of us are spending more time in front of our laptops, which is causing so much stress to us. We're too accessible. We can go to a meeting every hour of the day. So this has to be also taken into consideration in governance. How should how should how do we now communicate? Okay, I think among other things, what I've observed during this pandemic is that people want to know what's happening. They don't want to be left at a loss, especially employees. They need to know what is management doing, what is the board doing all about it. So constant communication is important. I wanted to share the anecdote again of a CEO who actually called each and every employee, regardless of rank, during the pandemic to just find out how are you doing, how are you coping. So this intent of communicating and interacting is very important because interaction in a virtual setting is different from interaction in a physical setting. So practices, culture has to be adjusted as well. Corporate culture in general.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Boots said. I mean, Marvi Tolentino asked the question and I answered it. She asked what is going to be the dominant corporate governance trend, and I answered. I said it's going to be ESG, but with an emphasis, in my personal opinion, on S, the sustainability. And again, I'm using the broader definition. No, it's not just being green. That's important, but it's being able to demonstrate a capacity to endure over time. And all of our stakeholders, our suppliers, our customers, our employees, our partners, our regulators, they're going to ask, what are you doing? How am I going to be sure that you're going to be around tomorrow? That's what we're going to do, and that's the challenge that boards face, and that's where really boards are going to have to exercise leadership. And I think Boots really hit it on the head, or it's in the head. It's really going to be a mindset change. It's going to be a total mindset change. So, if you think about the pandemic as being an accident, okay, we lost a limb, no, not Donald, but LIMB. But digital technology now allows us. You have these blades to use for your arms. You can become a cyborg literally. we can become better. So Governor Tetanco, we had an ICD seminar with him, and he used the phrase purposely, bounce forward. Boards have to bounce forward. It's not bounce back because the old normal's gone, but bounce forward into a new unknown. And everyone is going to be looking to the board.
So that's actually a very good addition to what Ms. Booth said, Ricky. But and then we actually have a lot more questions in the Q&A box. Unfortunately, we don't have much time. We only have 4 minutes left in our panel. So I will just ask each one of you to give your final message to the audience and to make it short and sweet, please. Thank you. So we can start with,
If the gentleman can start.
yes, Donald,
Mr.
you can
Allen.
start. Dr. Donald.
Well,
Good on
well,
you.
for me, 2020 is what I call the great pause, right? And I think when we all pause, and it's really a humbling moment for every enterprise. When you felt that the past 10, 20 years, everything economic is booming, tourism is booming, everything is going well, and then you're down on your knees because you don't know what to do. And that's okay because it has been an equalizing effect for all of us, for everyone. What is more important is from this great pause, what have we done? Right? And did we really take the time to really take a step back, gather our troops, and really prepare for a hopefully a better 2021? So it's not really just planning operations or supply chain. How do you go digital? Right? It's really rallying, gathering the troops, and really, especially on the governance side, when we talk and maybe risk management side and all of these, no, we have to put this into perspective. Most of
Please. I
We
think
lost
we lost Dr. Donald. There, it's back.
Yeah. So for me, it's really you don't have any more excuse not to do it, right? Especially for this great pause, for these few months, really preparing for 2021. So there, thank you.
Thank you. Ricky?
Yeah. I just like to say, nobody likes to talk about risk, right? It's unnatural. If you look at the Greek mythology, for those of you who are interested in it, in the fall of Troy, there was this lady called Cassandra who actually could forecast the future. So she knew what was going to happen. She knew the Greeks were hiding in the horse. But her curse from the gods was that although she could see the future, nobody would believe her. So that's kind of like the role of a risk manager. You see what's in the future. You have to project, and yet you have to prepare for it, as distasteful as or as distressing as it may be. And if anything is 2020 has shown us, it's being about anticipating risk and being agile. I told you earlier that the market, the stock market, is basically forecasting a quick rebound, right? Almost a V. But remember, it's not in a straight line. There could be a lot of squiggles on the way to getting to that higher level. So we have to be prepared. And if you have a risk management strategy in place, fine, improve on it. If you don't, please get started, because it's never too late. And that's the cost of your insurance. And thank you again to SEC and PSE for inviting me on to be on this great and exciting panel.
Okay, thank you, Ricky. Attorney Lani?
So I will now wear my GGAP hat. I would like to greet my fellow good governance advocates and practitioners out there. So let's continue to support each other in our roles as compliance officers, data privacy officers, risk management practitioners, so that we can ensure that there is fairness, accountability, integrity, and transparency in everything that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Lani. And lastly, Ms. Boots?
Well, we've all said that the pandemic was a great equalizer, regardless of company size, regardless of where you are, who you are, etc. I'd like to propose that the organizations, boards, companies, look at diversity inclusion as a way to address this adversity, which has become the new normal. So moving forward, I'd like you to consider diversity inclusion policies and practices in your organization. It's good for business. it's good for society, and it's good for the economy. Thank you. And I'd like to also thank my esteemed panel for a very interesting discussion, and of course, our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. On that note, I think I would like to add that maybe 2020 is trying to give us a 2020 vision that we should make some changes already in our lives and how we do things and how we do business. So, and also, I believe that if there's one key takeaway from this whole discussion, it's that corporate governance in the new normal actually requires us to give an even greater focus than what we're doing now on the company stakeholders, particularly our employees, on risk management, on going digital, and lastly, on being willing to innovate. And if companies would actually realize this as early as possible, then this would help them to survive and weather the storm that we are experiencing now. So with this, I would like to thank all members of the panel for a very rich and enlightening discussion. And I wish us all the best of luck as we continue to navigate uncharted territories in this new normal. Thank you
Thank
very much. Thank
Thank
you to
you.
SEC.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay
you,
safe.
everyone.
Thank you, Attorney Carmela and members of the panel, for that very engaging discussion on the corporate governance